engaging with the public, spreading the word about what we do, putting on events, walks and talks, things like that. I'll get into a bit more detail about some of the other things that I do to engage with the public further on in my presentation. I'll start with a quick introduction to the Trust, just so you all know a bit about what we do, how we formed. I'll then go through some of our recent fish passage projects. So for anybody that doesn't know, a fish pass or a fish passage might also be something that you know as a fish ladder. So it's a structure that's generally round the side of or part of a watercourse that helps fish and other animals in the river get over a barrier like a weir. So we've done quite a few fish passages as part of our history to help connect habitats. So I'll go through some of those, some of the recent ones that we've done. And then I'll just move on to some of the other things we do as a trust, and just again how we help educate people on rivers and why they're important and spread the word. So this is our vision, really, to improve the Ribble catchment for the benefit of wildlife and people. So we began as a trust in 1997 as a small charity. There were just 2 volunteers at that time, and now there's 20 odd full-time members of staff, so we've grown quite a lot over the 20 odd years. Do my slides keep up in time? Has that one just moved on? Jane, yeah, great. So this is our catchment map. So we cover from Ribble Head up in the Yorkshire Dales, where the Ribble starts, right through to Lytham at the estuary, where the Ribble joins the Irish Sea. We also cover all the main tributaries as well, so the Hodder, the Calder and the Darwen. It's about 575 square miles, and there's about 1.25 million people live in that area. So that's loads and loads of people that can all make a really big difference just by changing quite small things in their lives. So this is one of our most recently completed fish pass projects. This is Dunkenhalgh Weir, which is near Rishton. The weir's been there for over 200 years. It was part of a corn mill, which was on the site across what we can see, which was then Rishton Paper Mill more recently. As you can see from the after picture on the right hand side, it's quite a large structure. It was actually our most expensive fish passage project that we've done to date. It cost in the region of £160,000, which was mainly due to how much civil engineering was needed to construct the bypass channel there. I don't know if you'll be able to see from the photograph, it's actually a series of pools which are almost like steps for a fish. So they'll get into the first pool. It's quite a nice deep area that they can then gather up the momentum to jump up into the next pool. They can have another rest, gather up some energy and jump into the next one. So it's sort of like a set of steps around that weir for them. I can't think what else I've got to say. Oh, well, ideally for us, the best case scenario is always to remove a weir completely, to remove that barrier to fish migration. But in this instance, it wasn't possible. You might be able to see in the before picture that there's a red brick building across on the other bank, and the weir is actually integral now to the structure of that building. So by taking the weir out, we might have compromised the foundations of the building. So in a lot of instances, a fish pass is the only option really to improve access. And the reason we do this is because migratory species like salmon and trout need to come upriver to find suitable spawning sites in autumn to mate and reproduce and lay their eggs. And so as soon as they get to a structure like this that they can't get over, they then can't get any further. And that limits their habitat available for spawning, and so suitable sites upstream are all unavailable. So by doing this, we can help unlock some of those barriers and make habitat available further upstream. So this one here is Sabden Fish Pass, which is right in the heart of Sabden village. It was part of Victoria Mill, which if you've been through the village recently is the large housing development now where they're remodelling the mill buildings into houses. As you can see in the left-hand picture, it was quite a shallow trickle of water coming right over the whole stretch of the weir. But the embedded rock ramp that we produced has forced the water into a sort of S shape, which makes it a much deeper channel, which is easier then for fish to access back up. And it also creates a more natural riverbed with rocks and areas where fish can sort of rest and gather their energy and do the journey in parts rather than having to do the whole thing. By doing this project, we opened up 7 kilometres of watercourses upstream that weren't available to fish beforehand, and we're hoping that this might be the start of seeing salmon further up Pendle Hill by unlocking this barrier to them. This one here is Oakenshaw Weir near Claytonley Moors. Hopefully you can see from the aerial photograph on the right that there's some white water to the left of the photograph. So that's the weir. And then, so from the aerial photograph, you can see that there's a whole channel dug out in the field, and that is the fish pass. We call this style a bypass channel. So it is, just as it sounds, a whole new channel which creates a new route for the fish. When we combine this one with Dunkenhalgh Weir, the first one I showed you, which is roughly 1.5 kilometres downstream of Oakenshaw Weir, these two combined have opened up 14.2 kilometres of river habitat upstream, which have been inaccessible for the best part of 200 years. So this weir was created to help power a print works in Claytonley Moors. When we finished the fish pass, we had quite a spell of really hot weather, and the channel itself wasn't quite deep enough for fish to make their way back up. So there were some modifications made to make it suitable. In all of these projects, we do monitoring before and afterwards to check how accessible it is for fish. So we can do that in 2 ways. We can either put a dot of dye onto one of their fins, so usually it's red dye, and we can release the fish below the weir and then go back a certain period after, maybe a day, maybe 2 days, maybe closer to a week, and just keep monitoring how many fish have made it up past the structure. And then we would compare that with after we've done it and see how many more, and hopefully if we've done our job right, there'll be quite a good number more making their way up afterwards. We can also do that in another way. We can use a radio tag which is inserted into their abdomen, and then we go out with an antennae which picks up a signal from the riverbank of the fish, and we can tell whether they are upstream or downstream of the structure, and again we can figure that out. And then eventually that will fall out, the stitches will undo and it will fall out of their gut. This one here is Hoghton Bottoms Weir, which is not far from Hoghton Tower. And if you've ever been, it's a lovely rocky gorge on the River Darwen. This one couldn't come out because it's such a well-loved local landmark. It really is quite picturesque when you're there. So we worked our way round this again, and we had a rock ramp installed up the side of it. This was a really good one for us to tackle because it was the largest barrier on the River Darwen for fish. So it was just a really important one for us to help unlock some of that habitat above. We then did another fish pass upstream of here at Lower Darwen, and so together those have unlocked nearly 23 kilometres of the River Darwen. So that's another really big win for us, and one that we were really pleased to achieve. Now, all the ones I've shown you so far were part of our National Lottery Heritage Fund funded project Ribble Life Together, but this one here is an earlier project that we did between 2011 and 2015 in Burnley. So this was called URES, the Urban River Enhancement Scheme. And as you can see from the photograph, the Calder and the Brun in Burnley had been heavily managed and shaped by the Victorians. They had problems with flooding in the town centre in Burnley in the Victorian era, so they decided to try and tame the rivers and create really straight managed channels. That was great for Burnley. It did solve some of their flooding issues, but it just passed the problem on to Padiham further downstream on the Calder. Because by creating a really straight, narrow channel like that, when we get really heavy rainfall, it just flies down that channel with such force and without any meanders to sort of take away some of the power of the water. that it just reaches the next town down with just so much more force. So Padiham did the same thing, and now we obviously see the effects of that with the flooding in Worley, and so the problem just got passed on again downstream. So this project just aimed to sort of try and undo some of that work that was done in the Victorian area. So as you can hopefully see from the second picture, we widened the channels where it was possible. And then also you can hopefully see the two sections of white water. That's where we've put in rocks into the riverbed to just create a slightly more natural channel. And then again, as I was saying earlier, it creates places that fish can sort of hide between the rocks and get some energy for their journey upstream. Whereas if you can imagine making a journey upstream on the photo on the left, it's just like trying to run up an escalator that's coming down. You just, as quickly as you're moving ahead, the water's carrying you backwards. So yeah, that was quite a big project that we did right through the centre of Burnley. Some of the other things that we do in the trust, so we work with farmers quite a lot as the main landowners in the catchment. They're really important stakeholders for us to have on board. We've got 2 farm advisors in the team, and they will go out to farms and do what we call a pinpoint survey, which is when they walk around the farmyard with the farmer and they look at some of the infrastructure, things like downpipes and drainage, where water's collecting, and the sort of separation of clean and dirty water on the farmyard. We can also help to advise them for grants that are available for improvements that help to reduce runoff and things like that are impacting our watercourses. So hopefully you can see that's the same farmyard before and after. The yard was reconcreted and with additional drainage put in place so that standing water isn't collecting in the yard and mingling with obviously runoff from farm buildings and manure. We also work with farmers to look at grants that are available for things like tree planting and fencing, often through the Countryside Stewardship Scheme. And then we undertake quite a lot of that work with our volunteer team, generally through the winter. We also put on quite a lot of training events for farmers, things like soil management and fertiliser application. Along the River Loud in the chipping area, we've actually got a group, a Loud facilitation group, which involves 29 farms in the area. And they meet on a regular basis with us, and we put on special training with sort of expert speakers and also discussion groups, and it's a place for them to share good practice and maybe look at some of the changes to the infrastructure on their farmyards. And the hope is that by combining their efforts in quite a small area, that can build up to quite a big improvement in water quality. We see quite different problems in different areas of our catchment. So along the Hodder, it's mainly rural land, and our problems are predominantly runoff from agriculture, so from farms, from cattle being in rivers. And then in other parts of the catchment, like the Calder, our issues are more industrial waste and litter getting down storm drains and things. So yeah, our work has to be quite tailored to the area that we're in. Another really big aspect of what we do is woodland creation. So this winter just gone, we planted over 27,000 trees with the help of our fantastic team of volunteers. And since the trust began, we've planted over 200,000 trees. When we first started with that, we didn't really have the capacity to do as much as we do now. So those targets every year are getting bigger and bigger. And we now have plans to plant another 500,000 trees over the next decade. So our current target this winter is 47,000 trees, which sounds a very scary number. There's absolutely loads of benefits to rivers from trees. So they slow the runoff from rainfall. So if you imagine really heavy rain falling over a woodland, each drop has got to make its way right down the tree before it reaches the ground. Whereas if you imagine that same rainfall on a tarmac or concrete surface, it would just hit the ground and run straight to the nearest watercourse or drain. So by slowing that journey down, it then reaches the river a lot slower, and we see a lot less flash flooding after really heavy rainfall events. They also help to prevent erosion along riverbanks. So the tree roots help to hold the soil together and bind it, and then there's less erosion when we do get faster flowing watercourses. They also obviously take up water as they drink, which then helps to take water out of the land, increasing the ground's capacity to take up water. And they provide shade along riverbanks. So when we get really hot weather, like we did earlier this year for quite a few days in a row, those differences in temperature can be life or death for fish. It doesn't take long for it to get to a fatal temperature when a river's in full sun. So it can be as much as sort of 10 degrees different when you compare somewhere in a shaded area to water that's in full sun. So yeah, shaded rivers are fantastic, just shaded spots that fish can get some respite from the sun. Doesn't have to be all the way along, just nice patches nice and often. So now that you've had a chance to read the captions, I'll tell you a bit about this. This is some drone footage that a colleague took of a woodland that we planted in 2017 near Tosside, and it just helps to give you an idea of the scale of it. And as you can see, it's on quite high elevation, so that woodland, when it matures, is going to help capture the rain as soon as it falls, and then just help slow its flow downhill to Sabden, which is down in the valley there. Litter picking is another big thing that we do with our volunteers. So the photo on the left is Freckleton down towards the estuary, and that's a litter pick that we do in partnership with Love My Beach, probably 2 or 3 times a year, and that's tackling obviously some of the tidal litter that comes in onto those plains there. And then the right hand picture is Eves Brook near the centre of Preston, and there's a park area around that, which is unfortunately a bit of a hotspot for domestic fly tipping. So we get all sorts, from sofas to household electricals to clothes. And that was a United Utilities work party that came out, and it was over 60 members of staff that spent just 2 or 3 hours out with us. And behind all the masses of litter, you can also see just a few bin bags as well. So there was quite a lot of normal general waste collected, as well as the massive items. So all of that is helping to prevent litter getting into Eves Brook, where it would then join Savick Brook and then out to the Ribble. So any litter we collect at litter picks like that is prevented from being able to make its way out to sea. So hopefully helping to tackle the problem before it gets further down the line. And then obviously preventing the problems it causes to wildlife along the way, and hopefully improving the area and encouraging other people to give it a bit more respect, because they find that the less litter there is about, the less likely people are to litter. Control of invasive non-native species is another thing that we do quite a lot of with our volunteers. So this one here is Himalayan balsam, which I'm sure you'll recognise from our riverbanks. It's such a good plant for colonising riverbanks. It's so good at it, and the seeds often carry downstream, so it just keeps on spreading and become quite an issue for us. It's something we work together with the Pendle Hill Landscape Partnership on, and so we've done quite a lot in the Pendle area in partnership with them to control Himalayan balsam and other invasive non-natives. This one's quite a good one for tackling with volunteers, because it's so easy to do and it's not harmful to our health like other ones that we tackle, like giant hogweed. It's a problem for us because it's an annual and is only out during the summer months and then dies back completely in the winter. So it outcompetes native species, takes up all the space and then dies off. And then, as we were saying before with the trees, it then leaves no roots to help hold the riverbank together during the winter when the flows are higher and faster than they are the rest of the year. So it increases riverbank erosion compared to some native species that would colonise our riverbanks. It's just so good at spreading as well, and has completely taken over. So we also undertake control of giant hogweed, as I mentioned, and rhododendron and Japanese knotweed, but this one tends to be the one that we do the most of with volunteers because it's so prevalent and it's really easy to tackle. So how do we plan where to do our work? I have a colleague who works just on GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems. It's computer software which holds layers of information about our catchment. So that might be physical things such as barriers, the weirs that we've talked about, or sewage discharge points, or it might be more geographic features like the gradient of slopes and the flow path of water coming off there. It can also be like socio-economic features like sort of health and well-being. And so when we are planning a project, those factors can be mapped out and we can plan our priorities. So say when we are planning a fish pass, we can look at the barriers along a stretch of river and see how much watercourse would be unlocked by removing that one. So how far it is before the next barrier would be hit by a fish that was trying to migrate, and we can see where we can have the best impact for the sort of least input and effort and funding, sort of how we can spend funding the best to get the most results in what we do. Quite a useful tool that we use when we take out to events and things like the Royal Lancashire Show is our virtual reality headset. So we have a number of 360-degree videos which have been taken at points on the catchment where we've done projects, and then we can play them through our VR headset, and so people can feel like they're sort of there and they can have a really good look right round. There's some information that pops up to tell them different facts and figures about the construction work, and so it just helps us to show people some of our hard to reach sites that we wouldn't normally be able to take people to, and just helps to give them much more of an idea of the work that gets done on the sort of outer reaches of the catchment that hardly anybody sees. This was something we used last summer holidays. This was an app that we had developed for families to encourage them to get out by their riverbanks, and also just to learn something about some of the wildlife that lives along our rivers. It was an animated app where they were looking out for river wildlife. So there were signs with these characters on, and when they found them, they scanned them with the app and it would play the animation, and then it would also tell them a little bit about them, so the kind of things they might eat or how long they might live for, the kind of habitat that they like to live in. We used it last summer holidays at a number of parks and public spaces across the catchment, and we were hoping to repeat that at some of the most popular sites and then some new ones this summer, but obviously that's not been able to happen, sadly, as with lots of things this year. That's been put on the back burner till next year. We currently have a podcast which has got 12 episodes available at the moment. These are sort of interviews and memories from people who have been closely linked with the Ribble during their life. So the man in the photograph is a fisherman on the Ribble estuary. There's also a family who farmed along the river at Sawley for 3 generations, and so things like that, people's memories, how the river's changed over time or what it's meant to them. We have a selection of short films which we've been able to produce with our funding, just to help spread the word about what we do. So we've got one there about our education work, some of the things that children thought were in the river, like crocodiles and sharks, before they met us, and then some of the things that they learned out on their trip to the river when they looked at what was actually in there. And then other ones that tell people about why wetlands are important, things like that. For these things, we always tend to work with local companies where we can. So we had help with these from Ribble Valley Movie Makers and Northern Heart Films. So just trying to help keep that business within the catchment and help support local businesses with this funding that we've got. Education is a massive part of what we do, both formal and informal, really, sort of doing talks and things helps to spread the word, but also the work that we do with schools and uniform groups like Scouts and Guides. So this here is a local school visiting Dunkenhalgh Weir when it was in construction, so that they learn about why it was needed, the job that it does, and then we did some dipping in the river that we'd done before they arrived, and then they got to see some of the invertebrates that live in there that the fish will be feeding on, and it just helps dispel those myths that they think sharks and crocodiles live in our rivers, and also just helps to unlock just how fascinating they are. They also did some water safety that day so that they know how to be by rivers safely, and also what to do if they found themselves in trouble or found someone else in trouble whilst they were there. We also do quite a lot of arts projects with schools. So this was a celebration event with 5 Barn-Aldwick primary schools who'd all done an arts workshop. So these pupils here had made river creatures into hats, and then other schools had written river poems, and they came together to show all their work in a local park and just celebrate the River Ribble and all the mysteries that they'd sort of uncovered through this creative work and the workshops. We also work with older groups. So this is a National Citizen Service group, and these are pupils that are getting ready to leave college, and they do a scheme over the summer that involves a community project, some fundraising, a residential trip, and action plans and things. And they quite often come to us for their community project. So they are obviously getting involved in a riverside litter pick. But by far and away, the most popular thing that we do in terms of education is trout in the classroom. So this is when schools get a tank set up in their classroom, and we deliver 100 trout eggs for the pupils to look after for the next few weeks. So this, believe it or not, is 100 trout eggs. It doesn't look like it, but it is. And then in December, we'll set the tank up in the school and let it get down to the right temperature over the Christmas holidays before we then arrive in January with their trout eggs. They learn about the life cycle of the trout, its chances of survival in the wild, and why theirs will have such a better chance of survival in their fish tank. They learn about some of the things that it will eat and the things that will eat it. And then they look after them for the next few weeks and watch them transform into fry, into small fish, before we take them to a local river just before the Easter holidays and release them, and so they get to watch them go. And then from there they also do some sort of river field trip stuff with us. So again, we do the water safety so that they know how to be safe around rivers, and they also look at the kind of things that their trout are going to be eating once they are in the river, so some of the invertebrates that they'll be finding. Part of my job is setting these river walk routes. So there will be 15 in total. There's currently 12 in print, and the others are due to be completed soon. This is just another way to help encourage people to engage with their local rivers, or maybe find somewhere new to visit that they didn't know about. They feature information along the way. Maybe if they pass a fish pass, it's got some information about that project. We also work with local organisations where we can, so like parish councils or environmental groups, anybody that might have some relevant information that they want including and promoting in the leaflet, as well as local historians to help with some of the points of interest along the route and things to look out for. There's also an app that we use to complement the walk guides. So this just provides extra points of information and things like videos and audio clips to make it that bit more interactive. And again, if we've paired up with a local organisation on a route, then they can include a video about maybe something they've fundraised for, a bench that they've put in an area, or something like that. For each walk, we run a guided walk, and we always feature guest speakers on these. So this one here is one that goes through the centre of Preston, and we have there a member of the Institute for Civil Engineers, and he is telling people about all the bridges that cross the Ribble at that point, and some of the history about the structures and their uses. And then this one here is my colleague Adam, who manages our capital projects, our fish passes, and he's at Dunkenhalgh where it was during construction, and so he's telling people about the construction of the fish pass and the project there. And on that route we passed Oakenshaw as well, with it being so close, so the participants on the walk got information about both fish passes on the route from Adam, who's been managing those projects. Another part of my role is our interpretation panels, so just helping again to spread the word about what we've done, so that if people do spot one of our fish passes and think, what's that structure on the river, then it just helps to spread the word about why it's been done, how it's helping connect up habitat for fish and other river wildlife. It just helps to highlight some of our work and draw people's attention to it, and hopefully they'll stop and have a read whilst they're out using the public footpaths. Again, we can pair up with community groups and parish councils and things on this, so if someone was already wanting to include some information in an area, we can team up with them and help to put it on the board. Art installations is another way of sort of celebrating rivers and spreading the word about what we do. So this stone here is at Sabden. You might be able to see it in the picture before, just there. It's a nice stone bench with an inscription of a poem by a Sabden resident. So in case you can't read it, because it is a bit licheny in the picture, it says, "As you sit, think if you will of all the folk who work the mill, powered by the brook, built upon its banks, listening to the water, we should give thanks. The brook, the mill, the folk, remember this. They made this village what it is, our home." So that's just quite a nice reminder for people to just sit and think about all that the brook has brought to Sabden, and the fact that the village exists because the brook is there. These are two more recent ones. The left-hand one is a mussel in Lytham Mussel Tank. So Lytham had 3 mussel tanks which were used for cleaning the mussels before they were then sold, and one of them has been recently renovated and restored. There's information boards around the edge so that people know about the function of the mussel tank, but we help to fund this sculpture of a mussel right at the extremity really of our catchment down at Lytham on the estuary. And then the right hand one is a bench in Witton Park, which was done by a Pendle based designer, and we worked with a local Cubs group in Blackburn to decorate some pebbles with river wildlife. So again, that was a learning exercise for them, that we weren't looking at crocodiles and sharks, we were looking at crayfish, kingfishers, eels, mayflies. So it was a good learning curve for them, looking at some of the things that we would find along the River Darwen. And as you can see, the more colourful stones on the edge are the ones that the Cubs decorated, and they've been installed in the bench. And there will be an information panel going next to that as well, just to explain how the Cubs were involved with it, and some of the work that has gone on along the River Darwen further downstream. One of our most popular events is our bat walks. So people might think, what the heck has a bat walk got to do with a Rivers Trust? But bats obviously feed on the insects that emerge from the water and take up that space on the surface of the water. Particularly the Dorbenton's bat, if you've ever heard of them, they are known for foraging along water, so rivers and streams, lakes and ponds. So they're quite often found in water-based environments, but then also other bat species take advantage of all the insects on the surface of the water, and also need to find bodies of water to drink from whilst they are out in flight. So we do also find pipistrelles and noctules quite often on our bat walks. So it's just a really nice family-friendly activity that just helps sort of capture the interest of the children. We use bat detectors, which, if you've ever heard them, are quite a distinctive sound, and just, I think, being out in the dark by the river is just quite exciting for children. So it's always quite a fun activity, that one. And unfortunately, again, we've not been able to run any this year, so we're hoping that's something we can pick up again next year. So last year we ran a series of 6 sketching workshops with a Blackburn-based artist called Pat Southern Pierce. And this was another way for us to reach a new audience, really. So Pat comes with quite a following of her own, so her workshops sold out really, really quickly, mainly from people that already knew of her work or followed forums and blogs and things that she is involved with, but they had probably never heard of Ribble Rivers Trust before, and all of them were based at riverside locations, both urban and rural. So the one in the picture on the riverbank there is down at Sabden near the village hall, and then others were right in the heart of Padiham, spread right across the catchment, so that people got a chance to get to one near them. And the themes were all to help focus on rivers. So the one in Sabden was particularly focusing on how to depict trees in your work, and so it just helped to inform people that wouldn't normally know about us, about our work. So I just did a quick 15 minutes chat after our lunch break about the work that we do and why it's important, and some of the ways that people could get involved with some of what we do. And as I say, it's just reaching an audience who've probably never heard of us before, but they've had that day looking at rivers in a different way, not just how they would capture the light that reflects on them, but also they might go to a new structure and understand why the fish pass is important now, rather than just seeing it as an interesting structure to capture in their sketches. They were all really nice days, and they ended with what Pat calls a throwdown, which is when you all display your work like this. So yeah, they were a really good series of workshops. Something else that we do with our volunteers is to offer training courses. So this here is a riverfly training course, which is when volunteers sign up to monitor a site or a couple of sites near them once a month, and they then go out and do a kick sample in the river and look at the results in one of those white trays, and then record the results. So the different invertebrates that they might find in their tray would score differently. So one, like a leech that you will find in the dirtiest water ever, wouldn't score very highly. And then something else like a mayfly larvae, which will only be found in quite clean water, would score quite highly. And then also their abundance gets a score, and that's all multiplied together to give the river an overall health score. And when we get those results back from all the volunteers each month, it just helps us to keep track of the health of the river, with invertebrates being pretty near the bottom of the food chain in the river. It just helps us to spot a problem before it works its way further up the food chain. So if we're not finding many invertebrates at a site, then you won't be finding many small fish which will feed on the invertebrates, and then likewise you won't be finding many bigger fish which feed on the smaller fish, and then up to things like kingfishers, otters and herons that take the bigger fish out of the river. So it just helps us to be proactive, and it's sort of an early warning sign for us. Because we've got years and years of this information from all these samples, we can also see where sites are perhaps improving or declining. So if somewhere's historically scored quite well and then suddenly has a massive decline, then that might be a pollution incident nearby, something that we can follow up. Or if somewhere is just generally declining slowly all the time, that might be more like a habitat issue that we could look at. It might be that it needs some attention in terms of maybe a woodland planting, or something doing to prevent erosion or sediment build-up, things like that. So that's one of the ways that we keep an eye on the health of our rivers. Volunteers can also sign up to get involved with electrofishing. So electrofishing isn't as bad as it sounds. It is a cathode and an anode running off a battery backpack into the water, which then creates a current. The fish are momentarily stunned and drawn towards the metal probe in the water, and then that makes them really easy to guide into a net. So the second person in the team just nets the fish that have been drawn towards the anode. We then put them into a bucket of river water on the bank, and when we finish surveying that section, we will record absolutely everything in the bucket. So record what species, and if it's a salmon or a trout, we weigh it and also measure the length. We're only looking at fry, so we're looking at young ones, sort of the next generation. So we're only ever looking at a few centimetres long. We're not catching absolute whoppers. But it just helps us to look at what we call the recruitment, so what kind of populations we'll be expecting over the next few years. Now, they do talk about a 4-year cycle in salmon populations, having sort of a slump every 4 years. Unfortunately, we've now had 2 or 3 bad years for our salmon and trout numbers. We are thinking that this is probably linked to the floods in 2015 that affected Worley at Christmas time, because that is when the fish have laid their redds, their nests, and so that heavy flow of water is partial to washing away the fish nest, the redds, and either disintegrating them or making them really easy prey for other animals in the food chain. So there's a very low survival rate. So we think we are seeing some of the impacts of that, sort of a poor year for fish eggs during that winter, and then also some of the hot weather we've had for quite long periods over the last few springs have probably been quite damaging, and again is another reason for needing more woodlands along riverbanks to create that shade when we are seeing the impacts of sort of climate change and abnormal dry hot spells. So we are hoping that it's some of those environmental factors, but it is in line with some of the declines that you just see generally nowadays due to climate change. But we're hoping that some of the work that we do helps to sort of bolster that and improve populations over the next few years. So hopefully it's not all doom and gloom, but that is another thing that volunteers can train up and get involved with. And then one of the other things is barrier training. So by barrier, we're talking about weirs and things, and they can come on a training day, learn all about how to survey them, so what kind of things we are looking for, how to record the information and what pictures are needed, and then they might get maybe 5 or so sites to go and survey themselves, and they would send that information in, and that's more information that we can add to the geographic information systems we were talking about before, because we might know there is a weir somewhere, but we might not have any information on it, so we can put that information in, sort of how tall it is, how feasible it is to be either removed or have a fish pass put on it, or it might be a weir that we're not even aware of because it's in such an overgrown or inaccessible location. So surveying the riverbanks with by volunteers helps us with that, and so it could pinpoint a barrier that could be really easy to remove and then could help to open up that stretch of stream or brook. So that's something we've recently run 2 virtual barrier survey training sessions for volunteers to get involved with. So that's a bit of a roundup really about what we do as a trust in general and some of the projects we've been able to do with our Ribble Life Together funding. I'll just move on to our vision for Ribble Life Together, and then if anybody has any questions, I can take questions now.